The Shepnaz podcast begins now.
You're listening to the Shepnaz podcast, a podcast at Shepherd Church. Our mission is simple. We want to help people take their next step toward Jesus, and this podcast is part of that. We want to help you engage daily in your faith. Pastor Rob Paul is here, and we are still talking about the sermon from this past Sunday. So if you missed yesterday's episode, you're going to want to go back and start there. What it's going to do is kind of introduce you to this part of the church in Philadelphia that we're looking at in the book of Revelation chapter 3. So listen to that one first, then come back to this one. But we're going to dive into the next piece. This is where we talk about the city, the church, and then also what Jesus has to say about this church. Pastor Rob?
Yep. Welcome, Joey, to the podcast.
Back. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're in studio, what is this, Studio C now?
That's actually, this would be D. Because we started in my office, then we've been in the conference room, but we also did some remote ones at Shirley Grace's place.
That's right.
That was Studio C.
Yeah.
So now we're in Studio D.
Yeah.
Our actual real home will be Studio E when we get that done. But we have about 14 projects
and that's what
before
we're
that.
Say live from Studio. Well, not live from Studio E, but or we're going to start calling this the Nomad Podcast. But I'm sure that's already been taken.
Probably.
Yeah. So we're
homeless. It could be the homeless podcast.
So we're in the book of Revelation. We're nearing the end of the series where we're talking about the 7 churches of Revelation that John writes, what Jesus is saying in the first couple of chapters of Revelation. And we are in the middle of the letter to the church of Philadelphia. We read it, so if you need to go back and read it, please do.
Not the one in Pennsylvania, though.
Right, not the one in Pennsylvania.
All the way over in Asia.
And so if you need to go back and read it. If you missed yesterday's episode, make sure you listen to it. But we're going to jump right into talking about Philadelphia first.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the city and the church. Like who were they? What was the city like?
Yeah. So the city, as we said, was not the one here in the United States. It was over. It's actually in Turkey is where it would be. So it's called Asia Minor back then. But of the 7 churches that Jesus visited, Philadelphia was the youngest city of all of them. So it was fairly new, and it derived its name from a guy who followed up his brother as king, and he loved his brother and was very loyal to his brother. His name was Attalus II. But his nickname was Philadelphus, which is where we get Philadelphia. And actually, if you think about Philadelphia, like you know how the Greek language is very illustrious. Yeah. There's a word for love called phileo, which is brotherly love, which is the whole word this kind of comes from. So it was a city that had a good reputation. Again, it was kind of founded at a really cool place where several trade routes came together. And so there were people from all over the region and area coming together to do trade and passing through the city. And the city was actually founded to be like a missionary outpost for the Greek culture to the east. And so they wanted people to come there and experience the Greek culture and be able to take it with them to wherever they went. So it was a pretty cool city. It was located on a volcanic region, and it was called, the word is Katakekamene, I think is how you say it, which is a Greek word that means burned land. And as you can think of, a volcano comes out and burns the land. But what happened is after the volcano happened, the land became very fertile, and it was a great place for vineyards. Like they had lots of vineyards there. And so everybody was always happy, right? Because of all the stuff that happened. But the other thing about Philadelphia was that there was a great earthquake there. It was on like a fault line or something. There was a lot of seismic activity. And shortly after Jesus resurrected, like 15 years after that, the city experienced a great earthquake. And actually, it was the epicenter. And so some of the places just out from it experienced more devastation. But Philadelphia experienced aftershocks for years. And as a result of the aftershocks, it left psychological scars on all the people because they're like, there's all these aftershocks and it scared them all the time. So a lot of the people in Philadelphia moved out to the plains area, lived in a hut in the middle of a field because they didn't want to be around all the buildings that would fall. The people who lived in this city kind of tried to come up with all these ways to firm up their buildings and the walls in their buildings so that when aftershocks came, they wouldn't their building wouldn't fall over. But it was interesting that, as I was studying this, one of the persons said there was a lot of psychological scars on the residents from all the aftershocks and everything. But the church that was there, again, was similar history to the other churches, probably founded by the church in Ephesus, by Paul and his ministry there in Acts chapter 19. And there's not a lot said about the church in Philadelphia in Scripture other than really what is said here in Revelation chapter 3. But what Jesus has to say about it is really, really encouraging. And because, again, he doesn't speak any negative words to this church, there's a lot that we can learn from it. So we can dive into some of the things that Jesus said.
Yeah.
So verse 8, if you want to read verse 8, then we can
verse
talk
8
about
says
that.
This says, I know your deeds. See, I've placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name.
Yeah. So the first thing that Jesus commends them for is he says the church had little power or little strength. And at first glance, you might think, oh, that's kind of a negative, like, oh, look, you guys are cute. You have little power. That's not what he was commending them for. What he was commending them for was the powerful impact that they had with the small amount of resources that were available to them. So the week before, we talked about the church in Sardis. And in Sardis, we talked about how the city was a wealthy city. They had everything, and like gold flowed through the rivers. That was not the case here. This church didn't have everything. They had a small amount of resources, but they used the resources that they had to accomplish great impact. And I think Jesus here is complimenting them for taking the things that they had and maximizing them to build the kingdom and to make an impact. And so I think that, one of the lessons we can learn about this is that, the resources and abilities and skills are not what God requires of us to do great things. What he requires is just our availability and then to be wise with the stuff that he's entrusted to us. And it talks about that. Paul talks about that a little bit in 1 Corinthians. He says, brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And he chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. And I think the lesson to walk away from that is that it just takes a little bit of faith to have a powerful impact. Like, you don't have to have great resources. You don't have to have all these tools. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have, skills and abilities. You just have to believe that what God has given you is enough and be obedient to that. And when you are obedient to that, you can have an impact. And that's what Jesus was saying. And, Jesus talked about that also in his earthly ministry. In Matthew 17, he says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And so we just need to know that if God has called us to do something and he's equipped us with whatever he's equipped us with, it's enough to do the job that he's asked us to do. And sometimes I think we get paralyzed and we're like, oh, I can't do this, or I don't have this gift, or I don't have this ability, or I don't have these resources, or I don't have this or that or whatever. And those are excuses. The reality is they're excuses. If God asks you to do something, he's going to equip you to do it.
Coming November 4th is a fall movie night. Bring the whole family for bonfires with hot dogs, s'mores, hay rides, and an outdoor family-friendly movie.
Family camp is the highlight of our year. You ask our family, it's the greatest place on earth.
I'm sorry, I was late. Again?
What do I gotta do to make it up to you?
How about we go to that camp?
Church camp?
Yes.
You guys, this is glamping.
What? No Wi-Fi. I can't wait until you realize there's no air conditioning. What?
Buckle up, everybody.
The Camp Catawba Trophy. You should see this baby on my mantle at home. The family that takes home the most points at the end of the week takes the cup. From my cold, dead hands. We're not monsters, okay? Even though we do make sugar-free, organic, vegan, non-dairy marshmallows.
Oh, sounds like my kind of party.
Goes like this.
I thought my family would just magically become the family that I've always wanted them to be.
Things get a little more complicated when you get a peek behind the curtain.
Don't forget your blankets or lawn chairs. Invite your friends and neighbors to join us. That's November the 4th at 4 p.m. outside at our Gahanna campus.
That was fun.
That was something.
You're welcome.
You can find out about all our upcoming events at shepnaz.org/calendar.
I think someone says, where God guides, he always provides. And so this was a good lesson. And so Jesus commends them for that. He also commends them for being obedient to his word. And he says that they've kept his word. And again, we were talking in these other churches about how important the emphasis was on believing the right things. And what Jesus is saying here is that not only do they believe the right things, but they aligned their lives to it. And so by saying that by Jesus saying they kept his word, he is saying not only do you know it and believe the right things, but you're making adjustments in your life
accordingly.
Right. And that's a really good thing there. So then Jesus also said they had not denied his name. And the verbiage, the way the sentence is put together grammatically, helps us to know and understand that there was something in the past that happened in this church that indicates some kind of trial that they went through in which they were tempted or pressured or maybe even persecuted to deny, but they didn't, right?
They stayed true.
Right, so they stayed true. They held to his name. They were steady and true, and Jesus commends them for that. And then typically this is the place in the letter where Jesus says, however, but I wanted to talk to you about this. And there isn't any of that. It just totally skips it. There's nothing negative at all. And then Jesus goes on and basically what he does after that, he says here's the consequences. Here's my call to action or whatever. But Jesus begins by talking to them and saying, man, I have some good things I want to say to you. And so here's a couple of them really quick. One of them, he says, first of all, he says, see, I've placed before you an open door that no one can shut. So he says he's the one who opens doors and closes doors. But then to this church, he says, I've placed before you an open door that no one can shut. And what this word door, the word thyra, symbolizes an opportunity or access to something. So Jesus is saying, because of your faithfulness and everything, I'm opening an opportunity of ministry for you that no one can stop.
Yeah.
And Jesus rewarded their obedience and faithfulness with opportunities to serve their community, but also Jesus rewarded their obedience and faithfulness with access to people to share the gospel.
Yeah.
So Jesus was literally giving them an opportunity to take the gospel and share it with people. And here's how this was happening. They're a small church with little resources, but the world was flowing through the crossroads of their town. And because they were faithful, they were having an influence on people as they came. And then as they went, they were taking the gospel with them. And so while maybe the church wasn't getting bigger, the kingdom was getting bigger.
Yeah, it's
because they were influencing people. And Jesus is like, this is the opportunity that I've given to you. And we see in Scripture often places where Paul talked about open doors being opportunities to serve others, or open doors being opportunities to preach the gospel. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's given them this opportunity. And the other thing that Jesus said is that when Jesus said no one can shut the door, he said that no one can shut the door or hinder the opportunity that he's providing as well. And so I think there's a great deal of encouragement in that, because we also experience open doors. There are times when God puts before you an open door, which is an opportunity for ministry or access to be able to share the gospel with someone. And when we recognize an open door in our life, it means God has opened it. And if God has opened it, it means he wants you to walk through it, right? Yeah. And so when God speaks to us to minister to someone, it's because he has placed this open door before us. And it's important that we take advantage of that opportunity. And if we take advantage of the opportunity, then God's using us again to build the kingdom and to spread the gospel. And that's a pretty exciting thing. So it's pretty cool to think about that. Jesus promised a couple other things. He promised that the people who were persecuting them would be defeated and perhaps even some of them saved. And here again, Jesus talks about the synagogue of Satan. And if you remember, we talked about this in another one of the other churches, and it was basically Jewish people who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Yeah. And they were mad because they were still holding to the old ways of the sacrificial system and connecting with God.
This new.
Yeah. And so these people are they're mad at them. So they're causing problems. And Jesus says, not only am I going to give you this open door to do ministry, but all those people, the synagogue of Satan, the Jews that aren't worshiping you, they're going to come and they're going to submit to you. He says they're going to bow at your feet, which is another an act of submission. And then the other great thing is that some of them were even going to be saved. And this is very interesting. So we'll wrap up with this thought, but this is really interesting that Jesus said part of the church's reward would be that the people that were persecuting them and oppressing them would be saved.
Would get the inheritance that they have.
Yes. And it isn't that, and they were probably joyful about that. And I think that says a lot about the church because our typical response is we want our enemies to be destroyed or to suffer or to face negative consequences. And Jesus is like, your reward is that some of them are going to get saved. The Living Bible says it like this. The sons of this is in Isaiah chapter 60, and it's a kind of a foreshadowing of what Jesus was saying here. He says, the sons of anti-Semites will come and bow before you. They will kiss your feet. They will call Jerusalem the city of the Lord and the glorious mountain of the Holy One of Israel. In other words, Jesus was saying that there are going to be people who didn't like the Jews. They're going to come and eventually going to recognize they were right, and that they're going to come before you, and they're going to proclaim that this is the city of the Lord. And I believe that some theologians believe that means that some of them are going to be saved. And Jesus says, "This is your reward."
Yeah. Your reward is that your enemies are going to get the same reward as you.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's the Christian. I mean,
it's the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that can even give us that can inform us a little bit about what's going on in the world today. We've got the war in Israel going on, and it's the Palestinians against the Israelites, and it's the Hamas and Hezbollah and all that other kind of stuff. And the truth is there are some really evil people who are doing some really terrible things, but there are some people that are just misled, that don't that are caught in the middle, and these are the people that also we need to be praying for as well. And this is what Jesus says: your enemies, your reward is that they're going to realize that the real way, and they're going to come to it, and it's going to be partly because of your witness to them,
your faithfulness.
Yeah, and I think we might even be seeing. I don't know. I'm not a super smart guy, but it just seems like we might be seeing some of that play out even in the world that we're living in today. So
before we wrap up, what's something that we have all of this? What can people take away? Like, what can we do then? Like, what's our role in this? 2,000 years after this is written. To live into. Yeah,
so I think part of it for us is to recognize. I want to talk about this one more day. So tomorrow we'll talk about this more.
So let's then jump into it then.
Okay, yeah, because there's a really exciting part that I couldn't get into this one today, but it's really cool for next week or for tomorrow.
We're gonna do that. I mean, Joe gave us this sound probably 10 minutes ago that we were going over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to...
Is that what that was?
Yeah, we're going to wrap this up in one more day. So be sure to share this with your friends. Come back tomorrow. We're going to finish up talking about what it looks like to live into this. Be like the church in Philadelphia with all this great stuff. If you have any questions or comments, you can get a hold of us, podcast@shepnaz.org. You can find out all that's happening at Shepherd through our website, our app, and our social media pages. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joey. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.